The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Amy Turnbull, Regional Manager for CCIQ. I am delighted to have with me today Chris Robertson and John Goggin from BDO North Queensland. Chris is a Senior Financial Advisor at BDO Private Wealth, and she has extensive expertise in advising both business owners and individuals. She'll be joined by John Goggin. John is an associate at BDO in the advisory division who specialises in business restructuring and forensics. Today's webinar will go for around 40 minutes and we'll take questions at the end. Any questions that we're not able to get to during the session will be answered personally by Chris and John at a later time. I'm sure you'll thoroughly enjoy today's presentation. Without further delay, I'll hand over to Chris.
Thanks for introducing us, Amy. Before I start though, I'd like to briefly tell you all a little bit about BDO. We're a full-service accounting firm covering audit, tax and advisory. Our firm has been operating in Cairns since 1906. We are a local firm looking after local businesses. All decisions are made here locally, however, we also have the benefit of a national network and global brand. Our webinar, Your Business, How to Tell if it's a Roman Empire or a Banana Republic. So when we think about Roman empires, it conjures, large civilizations, strong technology. So the Roman Empire was one of the largest civilizations known and considered the largest and strongest empire of the ancient world. At its height, it covered over 4.4 million square kilometres and stretched from the Rhine River to Egypt and from Britain to Asia Minor. Amongst other things, they were known for their strength, technology and innovation. Like us, the Romans divided the day into 24 hours. But unlike us, their hours varied in length. For the Romans, there were always 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness. For example, a daylight hour in high summer was considerably longer than one in midwinter. So if we had this option now, how many of us would choose to make the work hours a little bit shorter? Before the multinational clothing and accessories retail chain, the concept of a banana republic or banana state was, and still is, a political science term. It refers typically to some Latin American countries under the control of foreign companies. The term suggests corrupt governments that benefit from these arrangements. Typically, these countries are known for being a little bit backwards, their hallmarks being badly run governments, poverty, and disorganised, inefficient economies. In fact, part of the success of the Roman Empire was their ability to conquer and efficiently run and control the ancient equivalents of a banana republic. There's no doubt running a successful business or being an entrepreneur requires success in a lot of areas if you want to build a strong and stable empire of your own. Many of us enter business for a myriad of reasons. So, who are you and where are you in your life? What are you trying to achieve? Some people go into business to pursue their passion, and there are self-help books and blogs on the internet dedicated to just this concept. Others go into business with dollar signs in their eyes, motivated to build wealth for themselves and their families or to increase their own personal power base. Some people go into business in order to take control of their own destiny, confident that if they're sitting in the driver's seat, they can make the best decisions to steer their personal and business future going forwards. Others go into business for lifestyle reasons, motivated by the flexibility that comes from determining your own work hours, believing that if you're in control, you'll no longer have to bring work home, work through the weekend, or over the school holidays. For most of us, unfortunately, this part of the dream never eventuates. Is the business working for you, or are you working for your business? How are those holidays that you're not having going? Are you building your own Roman Empire, or is there a problem? So now I'll pass you on to John, who's going to tell you a little bit about why you need to know what your business is worth.
Thanks, Chris. It's fair to say there are many reasons why you might need to know the value of your business. Planning for your future is one of those reasons. You need to make sure your business is on track to deliver wealth going forward. Another reason, and perhaps the main reason, is when you want to sell your business, and naturally you need to know what price you're likely to receive. It's important to be realistic when setting a sale price. Just as you would when you go to sell your house, getting a professional valuation of your business is invaluable. Remember, the market value may not equal the final selling price of your business. There's always going to be a negotiation process. Certain purchasers may even be prepared to pay a higher price if your business will offer them a strategic advantage, such as reducing their competition. Another reason for finding out the value of a business is one that I see a fair bit in my role at BDO. That is conflict resolution. Disputes can arise between business partners or shareholders. In that scenario, there needs to be a value placed on the business or entity to allow a financial resolution to be reached. Sometimes that can lead to one partner buying out the other one, or the business being sold to a third party. We were recently involved in a case where one partner wanted to leave the business and get paid out for his share. However, there wasn't any partnership agreement in place and no procedure set out to get the business valued or sold. The exiting partner got a valuation from a tax accountant, and based on that he was expecting a substantial payout for his share of the business. But it turned out that the figure he was advised was vastly overstated, and by the time we got involved, the conflict had worsened. Ultimately, we were able to explain to both parties the true position, and this allowed negotiations to progress from a much more realistic starting point. In the end, the matter was settled without the need for expensive court proceedings and actually avoided having a receiver appointed over the business. Another reason for having your business valued is when you want to introduce new equity into your business. You may have a long-standing employee that you want to acquire a share in the business. In that situation, it's important that both you and your employee are comfortable with the value being placed on any agreed stake. Finally, if you're aiming to hit the big time and one day float your empire on the stock market, then you want to ensure you're maximizing the opportunity by getting the highest possible value for your business. If you're ready to expand your empire and buy another business, or you're just starting out in your first business, it's critical that you're getting value for your hard-earned money. Later in our presentation, we'll look at valuations from a buyer's perspective. Well, now that you've identified the need to get a valuation, where do you start? The first thing to remember is what is actually being valued. When we talk about value, what exactly are we referring to? For example, think of the differences between enterprise value, fair market value, goodwill value, and share value. There are a lot of issues to consider. If your business operates in a company, you won't be valuing just the business itself, but also the company as a whole, and by extension, the value of the shares. Similarly, if your business operates in a partnership or a trust structure, the business value will be different to the value of those entities as a whole. Probably the most important requirement to get started is having your financial information accurate and up to date. It's not much use having historical figures if your business is in a different financial position right now. So make sure you work with your accountant and advisors to keep things current. The next thing to consider is doing research into sales of similar businesses. Talk to business brokers or franchisors. They will have information on the values that similar businesses are transacting for. Be careful, though, if relying on rule of thumb guidelines. Sometimes you hear about businesses being valued on, say, a multiple of weekly turnover. These guides are not exact, and they're no substitute for getting a proper valuation. Finally, there are a few practical points to consider. If you're not paying yourself a fair salary for the role you're in, then bear in mind that a valuer will make an adjustment to maintainable business earnings to reflect any difference. I was recently asked to value a company where the directors wanted to offer some shares to certain employees as part of their succession strategy. While on the face of it, the company ran a profitable business, the directors were surprised to learn that the business did not have any goodwill. Their own salary levels were too low for the roles they performed, and consequently this affected the level of maintainable earnings that we calculated. The same can apply when we look at whether you are paying a fair market rent for your business. It's not unusual for a company to own its own property and therefore not pay rent, or a related entity might own the premises and lease to you on more favourable terms than, say, to an arm's length tenant. Again, a valuer will adjust the business earnings for any shortfall. If you do own your own business premises, you will of course have to have this valued by a registered property valuer. This is to reflect any changes to market value from when you bought it. Finally, clean up any related party loans or shareholders' loans in your balance sheet. These will be considered surplus assets or liabilities, and they will be excluded from any business valuation. So in summary, there's a lot of preparation required, so seek the help of your business advisors. Now, back to you, Chris, to talk about another burning question. Can your business run without you?
Thanks, John. So, can your business run without you? Do you have a business that is too reliant on yourself or another person? Many growing and established businesses rely heavily on the skills and intellectual property provided by the owners and other key people, such as a company director, general manager, developer, key salespeople, or technical staff. Is this the case in your business? Where this is the case, the temporary or permanent loss of a key person could have a really detrimental effect on the business revenue and profits. If another suitable person isn't available within the business, consider the costs that could be incurred in recruiting and training a replacement. Can someone else be trained or taught to take on your roles and responsibilities? If the business is too reliant on you or one particular person, what should you do about it? In some cases, a cost-effective solution is to ensure the key people in the business in the event of death, serious illness, and disability. This could provide a cash injection to the business if one of these events occurred, helping to stabilise and protect the business, offset a reduction in revenue, and cover the costs of finding a replacement. Alternatives that we often try and consider are, for example, absorbing the loss of revenue into the current year's profits. This would result in a loss of income to the business owners and principals, and could actually cause many businesses to run at a loss. Can your business afford this? Large drops in revenue can result in some really negative outcomes. For example, your bank might decide to recall debt or reduce credit limits. You may have difficulty dealing with your key suppliers. If you have a cash reserve, this might be available for absorbing losses, but most businesses prefer to put extra cash or capital to more efficient uses or towards growing the business. A couple of years ago, my client Lisa had a car accident. She and her husband Tim run a small, locally operated tourism business. I should mention that the names have been changed to protect the innocent. Although they have a large number of staff that perform various functions, Lisa was the only person on the staff that had the special licenses required to continue their operations. Not long before the accident, Lisa and Tim had recently expanded, buying additional machines and vehicles and things like that, and had increased the debt to their bank. In this situation, Lisa was unable to work for around about 6 months, and in many cases, with the business not operating, most people in this situation might have got into serious difficulty, or the business may have even disappeared. Fortunately, in this case, not long before the accident, we'd put in case accident protection for both Lisa and Tim, so in this case they were okay. For other businesses, key requirements are making sure that you have a professionalised operation. Sometimes this requires careful planning. For example, do you have a suitable business structure? Do you have clear policies, procedures and processes in place? Do you have all the right licenses and permits? Do you and your key staff have defined and clear responsibilities? Do you have an appropriate governance structure or board in place? Both CCIQ and BDO have some really good online resources that can help with this if your business needs development in this area. Finally, what's your backup plan? What arrangements have you got in place should a contingency situation arise? It is really important to make sure that you can cover these events. For other businesses, succession is a key consideration. For example, do you have a family member that you expect to take over your business at a later point? When we consider some of the statistics of family businesses in Australia, of the 2.03 million small businesses, around about 70% of them are family owned. And 1/3 of all those family businesses are passed on to the next generation. However, only about 20% of the population takes succession planning seriously, and even less than that have documented buy-sell arrangements with their family. So for many family businesses, there are some really important considerations that might be needing to be considered. For example, retaining family assets in the bloodline is really important to some people. Avoiding family disputes is another reason some people don't take action. Or wondering how they're going to extract full value from their capital. And so I have some clients that I dealt with a couple of years ago where their family business, their farm, was always intended to be passed on to their children. And so Dad, currently at the time around about 85 years old, was eventually planning to pass on the farm to his sons by the time that they grew up. Unfortunately, his two sons were aged in their late 50s and early 60s. And at this point in time, they were also wanting to start to consider their own personal retirements. However, due to the small wages that they'd drawn from the business themselves over the years, didn't have much in the way of personal resources in order to support this, and were waiting on Dad to pass on the farm. And so in some cases, not having a clear and documented plan can cause a little bit of discontent or dysfunction within families, especially where these things aren't made clear. In other cases, the plan may be to pass on the family business or personal business to a key employee. In this case, it's really important to make sure that you have clear communication with the employee to make sure that they actually want to take an ownership in the business. There are some people that prefer just to be an employee and not take on all those extra roles and responsibilities of being the business owner. And in other cases, where the key employee doesn't have a really good understanding of what the intentions are and the timeline for events, may become impatient and start to seek opportunities elsewhere. They may be snapped up by a key competitor, or they may go out on their own. In other cases where the intention is for an existing business partner to take over the ownership, it's really important to make sure the arrangements are clearly worked out ahead of time and each business partner understands exactly what is expected in the event that a business partner wants to retire or resign or exit the business for other reasons, and making sure that these arrangements are also clearly documented in a business owner's agreement. With these agreements and arrangements, it's also important that the arrangements are flexible and realistic. It's all well and good to plan exactly how and when we want things to happen, but if our personal plans don't suit the other people involved in the business, we may need to adjust our expectations. Additionally, often for succession of a business, we're relying on the people that take over our share in the business to buy us out. And it's really important to make sure that we also have realistic expectations around price. And so now I'll pass you back to John.
Thanks, Chris. So if you are conducting a trade sale, it is likely to be a bit harder than passing it on to a trusted family member or someone in your management team who knows the business well. If you do have to market your business, then remember, preparation is the key. Have a comprehensive and detailed information memorandum about your business. This will make it easier for the buyer and help things progress a lot more quickly. The logical buyers are likely to be your competitors or large chains, depending on what industry you're in. As we discussed earlier, your business could offer them a strategic advantage. The buyer can also be a new entrant, so they may need you to stay on for a transitional period. Are you prepared to do that? Today we've spoken about whether your business is capable of running without you. Well, this is the time that proposition is going to be put to the ultimate test. You need to convince the other party that it can survive and thrive even without you. Being prepared to negotiate and having a realistic appraisal of value before you start will set you in good stead to achieve a fair price. Unfortunately, there are times when a business just may not be saleable. This is particularly true where the business earnings equate to little more than a wage. A buyer is not going to be interested if that is the case. This does not sound good, does it? You can't find a buyer, and there isn't anyone within your company or family to take over the reins. What do? In simple terms, the only option is to close up shop. We've all seen how market changes affect businesses, making some products obsolete and businesses unsustainable. This is especially true when we see new technologies and disruptive forces take hold. Think about the Kodak camera or the Nokia phone. Now, sadly, into the past. I loved my old Nokia. So if your business has met a similar fate, you may have to end up selling the business assets, paying off the creditors, and hopefully there are a few surplus bananas left for you, the shareholder. Don't forget, other formal options exist. For example, the voluntary winding up process can be a useful tool, particularly if there are tax advantages. One of those that comes to mind is the liquidator's distribution of capital gains to shareholders from pre-CGT assets. While this process can sound expensive, it can actually provide a real cost benefit to you. Here at BDO, we have significant experience and expertise in facilitating restructuring strategies for businesses that need to be formally closed. So, Chris, can you help us avoid all that doom and gloom and tell us when is a good time to sell?
Thanks, John. So, when most of us are thinking about when to sell our business, one of the key things that drives us is our emotions. And so, when things in the business are running badly, chances are income is terrible, key systems and processes aren't running smoothly, there's probably discontent and disruption amongst key staff and other people that work in the business. And in all likelihood, in addition to not making any money, you're probably not enjoying it. The business probably feels like this big heavy weight around your neck. And in this type of circumstance, lots of us just think, look, I really just want to get out. I want to let go of this thing that is ruining my life and move on to new and more wonderful things. Conversely, when the business is running well, chances are key systems and processes are running smoothly. We're making plenty of money, so our own personal incomes are good. And we're really enjoying things as they run in the business. And at this point in time, in most cases, the last thing that we're thinking about is selling the business because everything is going so wonderfully. Why would you give this up? But when it comes down to the right time to sell our business, we really need to separate our emotions from our smart decision-making capacity. And oftentimes, when the business is running badly, this is pretty much the worst time to sell in terms of achieving a really good sale price. And when the business is running well and we're reluctant to let this thing go, this is when we're most likely to achieve a favourable sale price. And so the emotional timing is really important in determining when we sell the business, but we should be making decisions based on hard and fast facts in most cases. And so when we're considering selling a business, one of the things that we need to take into account, hopefully in the event that we're making a profit, is tax. And so I know when we start talking about tax, most people start to get bored. I notice their eyes glaze over and they sit back in the chair and they start to think about other things while we drone on around the boring stuff. But it is really important to make sure that you have some awareness of how the tax implications of selling a business may apply to you. And so this doesn't just start from after you've sold the business. The key time to start thinking about this is actually beforehand. And your advisors and accountants will be able to help you determine whether or not your business is likely to be eligible for some certain exemptions and concessions that are available on the sale of a business, and also whether you need to take any steps prior to sale in order to increase or obtain access to these special concessions. Additionally, they may also need to take into consideration whether or not you've accessed these concessions before and whether or not you still have the ability to use them in the future. And also making sure that you meet the right requirements around timing for access of these concessions. And so this brings to mind some clients that I saw a couple of years ago. They'd, I guess, done a little bit of their own research. They'd consulted the fountain of all knowledge, Google, where the answer for anything can be found, and determined in their particular case, because they'd been operating their business for a particular amount of time, that they were going to be able to access a certain raft of concessions. And so my client John had been online and determined that after he sold his business, he was going to access the retirement concession and put all of the money from the sale of his business into super. And he determined that this was going to have a really favourable outcome for himself and his wife Sue. All sounded absolutely wonderful, except for the part where John and Sue told me that they were ready to retire tomorrow after the sale of the business. And I had to explain to them that the concession that they decided that they wanted to exercise involved putting the money into super where they wouldn't be able to spend it for several years. And so in their case, making sure that we put in place alternative strategies that not only had good tax outcomes, but had outcomes that suited their lifestyle preferences was also a really big consideration. Another key consideration on the sale of a business for many people is the rollover concession, which may involve using the money or the proceeds from the sale of your business in order to start your next venture. And so this is particularly important for some people that are looking at selling a business and starting a new one. And so when we're looking at exiting business, the next thing to think about is, well, what am I going to do after business? What's my life going to look like now? And so in the past, when we thought about retirement, many of us considered retirement as being a place where we sort of made a smaller life. We might have sat back at home, potted in the garden, spent time with the grandchildren, or started an adventure as a grey nomad. For others, though, this may not be the right choice for them. So Australians are currently living longer and longer every year. And I worked out recently that since 1970, we've each been living around about 8 minutes longer for every hour that we've been alive. So if this is the case, and we're thinking, well, I've sold my business and maybe I'm only in my late 50s or 60s, I might have 20, 30, even 40 years left to live. And so retirement may not be the right choice for you yet, in which case starting a new empire, for example, using those rollover provisions we just mentioned, may be something that's good for you. Having an encore job or starting a new career may also be a solution that's suitable to your situation, or going ahead and making more big changes in your life may be the right thing for you.
So earlier we asked, why do you want to be in business? Whatever your motives are, you need to go in with your eyes open. Firstly, consider, what are you buying? The business or the entity? Does it include things like intellectual property? And if so, is that protected? Is the business going to be ready for you to take over? Do you need to spend money to get it into shape? If you do, that will impact on what you're prepared to pay for it. Think about what key personnel need to be locked into the sale process. Do you need to tie the previous owner into a workout period to manage the transition? Are the existing staff up to scratch? What is the story with employee entitlements? Consider a couple of other points we touched on earlier. What are the risks in the business? For example, workplace health and safety or environmental issues. Are there any special licenses required? Make sure that their systems, policies and procedures are in place and that they've been properly explained to you. Finally, in terms of making the investment, you should be aware that investing your capital in any business is a risk. Consider the risk versus the reward. Weigh up the potential yield from the business when compared to other assets. Is it worth it? Without getting too technical, I'm just going to expand on that a bit. Generally, the higher the risk, the higher the capitalization rate involved. Looking at the graph, we can see there's little risk in investing in government bonds at around 2% return. But then again, there's little reward either. Publicly listed companies can be as high as 12 to 14% and tend to be less risky than private companies. They are more liquid investments that can be bought and sold quickly, and these companies can raise capital faster and cheaper than private companies. Many high-value, well-run private companies will be in the 20 to 30% bracket. So to put that another way, from a valuer's perspective, a capitalization rate of 20% equates to a multiple of 5 times maintainable earnings. For smaller private companies and startups, you're looking at 40% plus. That is much higher risk, but potential for more upside if things go well. So that was just a brief summary of the risks and rewards that you need to keep in mind when making a business investment. Thank you for your time today listening to our webinar. I'll now hand you back to Chris for some final thoughts and some questions.
So to summarise, Rome wasn't built in a day, and critical to your success will be planning for your future. So it's important that all the key parties work together for a complete and successful solution. It's also important to consider where to next and how things are going to work. So remember to plan your empire and can think about why you're in business. Don't wait till your business is in ruins before making a decision. It may have taken the Roman Empire over 300 years to fall apart, but your business can certainly fall apart in less than 300 days. So act now to harvest the fruits of your empire by making sure you put in place the right plans now and get the right advice.
Excellent. Thanks so much. That was really enlightening. So you're obviously back to Amy now, and I am going to take us through the questions. We have had some come through already. Sarah from Mackay said she has a question that's quite complex. What would be the best way of getting in touch with you to get your insights? I think I can probably answer that one actually, Sarah. We will be emailing everyone with a copy of today's presentation, along with contact details for both Chris and John. And they've both said that you're very welcome to get in touch directly, and they will be happy to help you that way. So the next one is from Andrew on the Sunshine Coast. He wants to know about the information memorandum that you referred to actually, John. His question is, what exactly should that contain?
Thanks, Amy. Information memorandum should include things like financial agreements and information on the current performance of the business, including the historical financial statements. It should also include things like a comprehensive business plan, assets and liabilities that will affect the long-term financial position of the entity, relevant agreements between the business and its suppliers, customers, and lessors, any key contracts, any business licenses that are needed to continue operating, and if they have any intellectual property, you'll need details of that. Also, it's important to have a schedule of key staff, the roles they're performing, length of service, etc.
Excellent. Thank you, John. I've got another question from Tracy in Cairns. Tracy asks, with regard to rollover concessions, how long do I have to buy a new business? Is there a time limit? Also, what if I change my mind and decided not to purchase another business? I think that one's probably for you, Chris.
Thanks, Amy. That's a great question. So when you're considering using the rollover provisions from the sale of your business, it is really important to make sure that you do get the right advice around how that might apply to your situation. So for example, you might decide to access the rollover position even before you actually effect the sale of your business. And in this case, you've got up to a year beforehand in order to start this. Alternatively, it may be too much for you to take on 2 businesses at once, and you might be waiting for the sale of the first business in order to start the second. And in this case, you do generally have 2 years to take up this option to commence a new business. However, it is important to make sure that you do stay in touch with your accountant and your advisor in the event that it doesn't happen, because if you don't access the rollover provision and you wanted to make other choices, you've only got limited time in order to do that, and you don't want to miss out on the concessions that might be available to you.
Good advice. Thank you, Chris. All right, that takes us exactly up to the 40-minute mark, actually, so that's all we've got time for today. Chris and John, as I mentioned, will address any questions that we didn't have time to get to this afternoon. On a final note, CCIQ's quarterly pulse survey is closing tomorrow. This information is vital for CCIQ to be able to represent your interests. Every response counts. Also, all participants in the survey will go into the draw to win an iPad mini. If you'd like to complete, simply Google CCIQ Pulse. Thanks again for joining us today, and of course a very special thank you to Chris, John and the team at BDO. If you're interested in checking out previous BDO webinars, you'll receive a link to these in the email also containing today's presentation. Thanks again and have a great afternoon.